pronouncing your name correctly. Welcome everybody to this Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav seminar series, which we are doing at our CWDS. And, this is a government kind of sponsored rubric under which one tries to highlight, 75 years in some of the achievements and some of the changes that have happened in post-independent India. That's kind of the Akam or Amrit Ka Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav kind of motto. So today we have Dr. Suchismita Chattopadhyay, and she's going to be talking about a very interesting topic with regard from a gender perspective. But before we move into that, I'll just read a short thing of her bio so that we know. So Suchismita is visiting faculty with Krea University, where she teaches the course Critical Theory and Demands of the Political Present. She also works as an external consultant with Oxford Policy Management. She has a PhD in social anthropology from the Graduate Institute of International and Development Studies, Geneva, Switzerland. Suchismita is a PhD dissertation was Fashioning New Selves, Grooming and Personality Development in Delhi, India, which contributes to discussions over aspirational citizenship, immaterial labor, forms of middle-class consumption, and the politics of self-fashioning while the self-improvement industry. So I think this is something that all of us have been introduced through the media largely, even though we may not have direct experience of it, and we live in Delhi. So it's a reality that is available to us. And we look forward to hearing from you on this.
Thank you. Yes. Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Great. So thank you, Professor Adlakha, for that brief introduction. And before I begin, I would like to thank CWDS for giving me this opportunity to present my work. So today I'll be presenting one section of my PhD, which deals exclusively with self-improvement, with the concept of grooming or self-improvement with respect to upper caste women located in West Delhi. And just very briefly, the way I did my research was this, that I conducted an ethnography where I was a student myself, and I directly participated in all the classes that happened, which took place in different institutes like spoken English classes, finishing schools, personality development classes, and so on. And so today, what I'm going to be presenting before you is, in fact, one site of my fieldwork, which is this finishing school for upper caste and upper class women, because mainly the audience with respect to the fees that they were asking was mainly women from the business class families located in West Delhi. And I thought that this vignette and this particular field site would be interesting to see how etiquette training and grooming have become a part of upper caste and upper class women's lives in a way which is different from how we knew of grooming and the formation of the good woman in the late 20th century. And this is very much from the point of view of a consumerist economy. And I thought it would be an interesting place to talk about it and also sort of have a discussion. And
can you please all put off your audio? There's some disturbance. Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah, sure. The other side of presenting on Zoom, but it's we're all like used to it now, and we all kind of go around with it. So so today I'll be talking about a particular finishing school which I call the Etiquette School, which is located in West Delhi, and I would like to begin by narrating a small vignette from my fieldwork that will set the scene of my field site, and which will also help us situate grooming schools / self-improvement industry in the larger context of the city. Before I begin, I'm sure, I don't know how many of you are familiar, but this is something that you see a lot in North Campus and around university towns, advertisements for spoken English centers and personality development classes. They often come as advertisements, hidden kind of slid under your newspapers and so on. So this is like a sort of an institution. These are the kind of institutions that have been around for a while. And the more I sort of started looking into this idea of self-improvement via, say, language or deportment, say through spoken English or soft skill centers, the more I discovered that there was actually like a pretty big grooming industry, which is an informal industry in Delhi. And I sort of tried to systematize it at least, or make some sense of what is exactly happening, who do they cater to, and what kind of selves are being fashioned in these places, because all of these grooming institutes promise what is called a polished transformation and the formation of new kind of subjectivities. So I'll present my work. I'll start with a small vignette from my fieldwork. So yeah. So 7 women between the age of 22 and 37 were sitting, listening in rapt attention to a well-dressed and expressive woman on what constituted ladylike behavior and deportment. Ladylike behavior, according to Asha, the image architect and grooming teacher at the Etiquette School, and this is what I would keep referring to this finishing school as the Etiquette School, or TES. So ladylike behavior, according to the grooming instructor Asha, meant nazakat. So it's being like either being elegant or being delicate, and femininity, but femininity which is not being excessively dainty. So ladylike way of sitting, as demonstrated by Asha, was sitting with knees crossed, hands on the lap, and tilting a little either towards your right or your left. Asha then proceeded to check the posture of the class. She paused to adjust the backs of the women and check the space between their calves as they sat with their knees crossed. Peremptorily, Asha announced to the class that ladies never sat with their knees spread open. That is a manly way of sitting, she explained. If we ponder a little, we will see, and this is how, and I'm directly quoting Asha over here. If we ponder a little, we will see that God has made our private parts different from men. We don't have them in the same way that men do, and so that only we can possess the ladylike way. And the men, if they sit in a ladylike way, it will be uncomfortable for them. And if they do sit like that, we call them gay. Girls who are tomboys, their speech would be aggressive and they'll have a manly way of doing big gestures. And big gestures, as we know, they are dominating. Thus, gestures also play a big role. They also communicate a message, and that's how people will perceive you. So ladylike way, take less space, sit like a lady, show that poise, show that feminism. End quote. Asha, the grooming instructor, meant to say femininity, but the irony is conspicuous in the slip of tongue. Now, it might sound anachronistic, but the scene is not from an early 20th century finishing school for women. This is from a class in April 2019. Finishing schools, as some of you might be aware, are institutions where elite young women were sent after formal schooling to learn the art of social graces while they got ready for marriage and domesticity. The finishing schools, most notably in Switzerland of the 20th century, were populated by elite and aristocratic women. So some of the notable examples from India include Maharani Gayatri Devi and Indira Gandhi, who were sent to schools after they finished their basic education, and to make them more ladylike. So reinforcing patriarchal beliefs, women's magazines and institutions like finishing schools promoted training in social etiquette, deportment, flower arrangement, and table manners as important wifely qualifications. The women's rights movement has led to a decline in the number of finishing schools. Now, there still remain a couple of schools in Switzerland, and in the last 10 to 15 years, there has been a steady stream of clientele from Latin America, India, Japan, and the Arab countries. So now, while grooming schools are a waning phenomena in the West, in India, it is a thriving business. Grooming schools in India have morphed from being an exclusive domain of women and the inculcation of social graces. The new avenues of employment and the spaces of consumption have contributed to a wider definition of grooming. Grooming schools promise people a polished transformation and consequently the fashioning of new selves. Now, before I delve more into the specific sites of grooming, I would like to clarify that by grooming schools, I'm not referring to the beauty industry or to the makeup classes that immediately get associated with the word. Here, I use grooming schools as a shorthand for the number of privately owned self-improvement improvement institutes that have mushroomed in Delhi and in other parts of India, and where their main stress is on bodily practices. So these grooming schools aim to teach lifestyle skills, embodied expressions of professionalism, and social skills. So I'll quickly share my slide from here. Yeah. Okay. Can you all see the slide?
Yes, we can see it.
Great. Now, so this is done as you like in terms of teaching lifestyle skills or an embodied expressions of professionalism and social skills. This is done, as you can see from the slides, through a series of practices that include language, voice and accent training, soft skills in the form of communication skills, time management, motivation, emotional intelligence, posture, comportment, appearance management through fashion and customized styling, social and dining etiquette that include training in using cutlery, oenology, and the know-how to organize and to throw dinner and cocktail parties. Now, the grooming schools in Delhi can be found under the various headings of spoken English classes, personality development classes, public speaking workshops, finishing schools, soft skill training centers, and something called image management or image consulting. Now, it's a relatively new profession, but it is still quite, I mean, it's still like quite popular in the grooming circles, and the image consultants are like the most elite of these institutes where, say, a grooming, where an image consultant can charge you up to 7,000 rupees for 2 hours of consultation. Now, today, I will be discussing a finishing school for women located in West Delhi as a particular site of grooming that is geared towards teaching body language or deportment, or as what the instructor there called ladylike behavior. And so this particular finishing school also teaches etiquette and lifestyle practices. Now, before I get into the details of what constitutes ladylike behavior and what is the path to becoming what the title of the talk says, the Cosmopolitan Diva, I would like to briefly establish the context that contributes to the growing popularity of grooming schools. So in the backdrop of a rapidly globalizing India in the 2000s, the Delhi Development Authority actively pursued its ambition of turning Delhi into a world-class city. The facelift of the city in DDA's Vision 2021 included the prevention of the growth of slums, concentrating on slum rehabilitation, modernizing public transportation, expansion of the satellite cities that constitute the National Capital Region, amongst others. Special emphasis was laid on trade and commerce, where the Delhi Development Authority Master Plan observed that shopping and commercial areas reflected the economy and image of the city, underscoring the importance of retail and allied service activities in the economic structure of the city. And this is what DDA calls the establishment of imageable landmarks that will dot the entire city of Delhi. Now, what emerges is that despite the economic unrest created by the making of a world-class city, the city as a notion of lucrative investment rests on the creation of an attractive urban imagery.
Excuse me, can someone please turn off this video? Yes. Sorry about that.
No problem. So Asher Gertner addresses the specific nature of Delhi's worlding practices as one that is rooted in a rule by aesthetics. Modern cities, according to Gertner, are presumed to be built on the calculative techniques and expertise in planning via maps, surveys, census, documented land allotments, and so on. However, millennial Delhi reveals the glaring absence of accurate maps and statistics of the population or the territory. Now, researching on the mass slum demolitions in Delhi, Gertner argues that it is the aesthetic norms that have replaced the processes of planning and legality. So the political decisions of who can claim the city as their own have come to be determined by codes of appearance and not documents and records. So it's a question of appropriate visuality that has taken precedence over questions of procedures, plans, and legality. So, for instance, in like right opposite JNU in 2003. Now, right now there are three big malls that have come up, the DLF malls, and at one point there was actually a court case because the malls were actually violating the environmental laws. And there was also a slum that had conformed to the land use designation of the master plan. They were also erased. Now, it was argued that the slums looked illegal and unplanned, thereby harboring nuisance causing elements. But then the glossy artistic depictions of the malls, as of these future malls at that time, was thought to be like something that was consistent with the gated enclaves that were residing in and around near where the mall is. So there was something about the visuality of the place that sort of suited with the coming up of the malls. And this is also the time at the early 2000s when you would see, and even after that, where there were a lot of the media was reporting about how turning Mumbai into Shanghai or Delhi into Paris. So the world-class aesthetic of Delhi found its very visible articulation in the private gated enclaves, new spaces of pleasure and leisure, and also in like the new forms of like new places like shopping malls, restaurants, wellness centers, and what Christian Brosius calls the emergence of the religio-touristic sites within the city. Now, the significant rise of gated enclaves with names like, say, Beverly Park or Mayfield Gardens, Ridgewood, or even Malibu Town, malls like DLF Emporio and Promenade, with restaurants offering international cuisine and spas and beauty salons, point to a new visuality of the city that is steeped in promoting an urban lifestyle that is also globally recognizable. Now, however, a city is not just visually identified by its sites and places. The urban imaginaries of a city are co-constituted by the sites and their inhabitants. So people also need to demonstrate their belonging to the urban spaces and its associated lifestyles. So the world-class city of, the world-class city also then must be a visual spectacle. So if you take, for instance, the architecture of any mall, say, for instance, the DLF Emporio, which boasts of luxury brands, there is a general design that holds true for most malls in the NCR. The malls have these large atriums, and there's a sense of open spacing where everything is visible to the eye. There are wide corridors, and there is what is called the perfumed, air-conditioned fragrance, and there's a shiny marble flooring. And there's also a way in which everything is visible, like there are these huge chandeliers, and it is also designed in a way to draw attention to the workforce and the consumers. So in this ambience, world-class spaces demand a new visual register of identification from their participants. So at the level of the workforce, it can be in the efforts to speak correct English, the uniform and makeup, depending upon the branding of the particular store, in the eagerness of the workers and their enthusiasm to please and to be of service. The malls have visually amplified the demand for face-to-face customer interaction. Similarly, the consumers or the clientele also must demonstrate a sense of belonging that go beyond possessing the monetary means to consume. So the economic wealth also needs to be supplemented by a form of orientation or a disposition that that coincides with like the idea of belonging to a particular place. For the aspiring clientele to the new spaces of consumption and the workforce of the global economy must speak and read the language of world-classness. The performative aspect of showing one's belonging to the new spaces of leisure and pleasure and employment must be made visible via the English language, deportment, and grooming. Simultaneously, the burgeoning service industry as new spaces of employment mandates the production of new sensibilities and work dispositions in the form of affective labor and aesthetic labor. Now, affective labor is one part of immaterial labor that is embedded in moments of human interaction. It is in the providing of feelings of satisfaction, well-being, and a sense of care that has come to dominate the service industry. So in the context of immaterial and affective labor, soft skills are tools that help perform affective labor effectively. Now, they refer to a cluster of personality traits going back to the earlier slides that I was showing you, which includes, say, things like attitude awareness, conflict handling, etiquette, communication skills, listening skills, self-management, time, and stress management. However, the point I'm trying to establish here is that not everybody is always already adept at soft skills or can effortlessly display a sense of belonging to new spaces of leisure and employment. Grooming schools come into focus precisely to address this gap in the sensibilities of what constitutes appropriate attunement to all these new spaces. The appropriate attunement, according to the grooming schools, is found in speaking the right language, which is always English, appearance, body language, soft skills, and etiquette. I understand this attunement and belonging as the desire to be what I call globally familiar. Now, I borrow this phrase from Ethiraj Dattatrayan, who uses globally familiar to describe the effects of transnational media and its related practices. I use globally familiar as a summarizing idea to describe the multiple aspirations that dominate the different grooming sites in Delhi. The grooming schools in Delhi teach being globally familiar through a series of bodily practices and dispositions. So now that we have set the context of a certain globalized Delhi, which is steeped in the idea of a certain politics of visuality, now let's focus on what I call the grooming terrain of Delhi. Now, since I'm concerned with the fashioning of new selves, it becomes pertinent to ask as to what are the different sites and institutions in Delhi that are engaged in crafting these new selves. So on one spectrum lie the spoken English centers that promise upward mobility and proficiency in English. So English is imagined as a resource that enables the capacity to aspire and a necessary skill in order to gain employment and success. Now, however, simply learning how to speak a cut-price version of English language is not enough. The liberalized Indian market, with an expanding service sector, amongst other things, also requires its workers to embody certain skills and a body language that would then make them global. Thus, the overall improvement of English also needs a developed personality to match your soft skills. So personality development classes, or PD classes, as they are often referred to, very popularly, they include soft skills modules like communication skills, interview skills training, self-image correction, manners and etiquette, setting goals, and motivation. Now, the personality development classes are seen as spaces that embody the neoliberal rationality of self-motivation and enterprise. The existing literature on aspirational mobility, soft skills, and aesthetic labor have largely been concerned with the marginalized youth who are taught soft skills so that they can be market ready and employable. However, the clientele of the grooming schools actually show a wider range of individuals from different age groups and incomes who also aspire to fit in and belong to these new spaces. So it is here that today I would like to focus on a finishing school that is located in West Delhi. Unlike the clientele that say frequented the first two of these this list, like say spoken English classes or PD classes, the women in the finishing school, which I'll refer to as the Etiquette School or TES, at TES were the upper caste and upper class women of West Delhi. All of them hail from business family. I regard the clientele of TES as elite because of their family income, caste, and class location. The aspirational trajectories of the women at TES were not at all concerned with becoming employable and joining the labor market. I plot the aspirational trajectories of my interlocutors wanting to firstly consolidate their status and identities in their families and extended networks, and secondly, by desiring to embody new lifestyles and be part of the world-class spaces of the city. I'll show that the TES classes actually end up broadening, or at least the TES classes attempt to broaden the spending horizon of its clientele, and at the same time, they produce caste and class through consumption and lifestyle choices. So unlike my other field sites like the spoken English and PD centers, and I also had like private sessions with image consultants, it was much easier to access, say, a spoken English class or a PD class. But when it came to accessing the finishing schools, and especially this finishing school in West Delhi, it seemed to be, it was quite difficult to gain access, and they were the most reluctant to actually let a researcher be amidst their classes and amidst the faculty. And also the second thing that also stopped me from doing a full course with the finishing school was because all of these courses were priced at 70,000 compared to a spoken English class and a personality development classes, which are actually which are much less expensive compared to, say, a finishing school that is of this kind here. But then, what then I ended up doing, and the way I sort of gathered the data, and the way I ended up interacting with my interlocutors is this: that I paid and attended what they call a trial class, and it was in that process like I got to have some access with the students, and I also ended up getting the material, the teaching material, and whatever was used in those classes, and I also attended a couple of other sessions through like one of the faculty, and then it's just sort of snowballed into getting what I call a tangential access to this entire space of the finishing school. Okay, so this is the Etiquette School. The brochure of the Etiquette School in West Delhi describes itself as a finishing academy with international affiliation and Swiss-style finishing for women. Now, my presentation is titled as Fashioning the Cosmopolitan Diva, and so it's only prudent to reflect as to what one even means by a diva. Now, the word diva, of course, is derived from Latin and was normally associated with powerful and glamorous women. So, but the word also has been used in contemporary media to brand women celebrities who are perceived as temperamental, inscrutable, and evidently self-absorbed. But in the Etiquette School, like in the TES scheme of things, and after reading the Cosmopolitan handbooks that I was given, the divas were imagined as women who were successful and ladylike women with a touch of glamour. Instinctively, the presumption is this: that being a diva cannot be taught. However, the Cosmopolitan Diva module at TES is a teachable category that can be defined via body language, public manners, etiquette, makeup, and lifestyle practices. Now, some of the reasons that were given to me as to why women joined this finishing school was this: that one was to gain exposure to what they call the international culture. The second was something like to be groomed in a ladylike fashion so as to be eligible in the marriage market. And then it was also to learn soft skills and etiquette to keep up with the family's upwardly mobile status. And now the website at the Etiquette School informs that the founder of the Etiquette School gained her education in luxury brand management from London, and she also finished a course in one of the finishing schools of Switzerland. Now, the Cosmopolitan, this is the Cosmopolitan course that was offered, and this is the brochure there. So it's a syllabus to being a Cosmopolitan diva. So it was divided into two modules, and is what is called the first one is in the Cosmopolitan one, aimed at making a diva who was gorgeous and charismatic and winsome. Now, this included basic skincare, hair care, styles of makeup, soft skills like conversational skills, and also social graces of, the art of walking, sitting, and so on. And at the same time, there was also a section on diet and nutrition, the art of dressing. Now, it also included cookery classes in what is Lebanese and Mexican, Thai, and Italian food. Now, there's also something called there's the Cosmopolitan 2, which also has the same amount of things, but it also calls itself as advanced makeup, and it also includes confidence building, self-motivation, how to be influential, and so on. And all of these are essentially what they call a very teachable, these are called as teachable categories. You'll also notice that there's a lot of usage of French words over here, like say jolie and intelligent and so on. And it's also the idea of this Punjabi Bugs finishing school to be in touch with what they claim to be a Swiss finishing for Indian women. And it's also a way to kind of establish one's international credibility, because there's a long list, if you look at the website, as to from where all the founder of TES has, attained her degrees. So, and also this Cosmopolitan module is 6 months long. Now here, I'll focus on two instances that contribute to becoming the Cosmopolitan diva in the TES imagination. The first one is going back to the vignette that where I discussed ladylike. Now, finishing schools as sites of enactment of aspirational trajectories treat the body as a site of illusion. Thus, for TES, ladylike disposition was located in the positioning of women's knees, their smile, and the expanse of their gestures. The TES handbook also asks women to not jiggle or tap their feet and requests them to sit or to always sit with their knees together for the most basic ladylikeness. However, neither the book nor the instructor could ever explain why ladylike behavior was the most desirable. Ladylike grooming at TES also extended to elaborate instructions on manners, dressing, dining etiquette, and polite conversation. The handbook reprimands women from having public meltdowns, emotional outbursts, and altercations for their instant boys' crushes. Through lessons in diamond grading, oenology, lessons in hosting, home management, and lifestyle choices, the Cosmopolitan handbooks produce and reproduce class and commodity consumption. TES classes also help broaden the spending horizons of its elite clientele and at the same time are committed to the production of the supposed genteel femininity through new lifestyle choices. Now, I understand the emergence of world-class spaces is also promoting a new aesthetics of visibility, where inhabitants of a city must embody new modes of belonging that signal a familiarity with the global. This familiarity at new workplaces and sites of consumption are produced via bodily practices. Aesthetic labor in the context of new spaces of employment demonstrates how workers' bodies are transformed to represent the values of corporate brands. I contend that the lens of the aesthetic labor can also be expanded to understand the pedagogy of TES. The TES Cosmopolitan Diva emerges in the context of how grooming schools are fashioning selves that look good and sound right, not just as employees, but also as consumers. Moreover, there's a willing and paying clientele of upper caste women who want to belong and who want to look and belong to the imageable landmark in the city. It is the desire to belong to the world-class spaces of Delhi that makes TES a voluntary and a self-sought place. The disciplining and the performance of ladylike posture that can be understood via, say, Foucault's dressage, here is a voluntary choice. Much of the discourse at TES, if you take a quick glance, is not very unfamiliar. The syllabus of Cosmopolitan 1 and 2, much like the patriarchal institutions of the family and school, scrutinizes and corrects women's clothing, speech, gait, and deportment. But the training module of TES extends beyond bodily training and includes training in appropriate lifestyle as well. I argue that the TES as a finishing school cannot be simply viewed as a site of gender disciplining, and neither are the clients passive recipients. The women use the classes to consolidate their class and caste status and forge new identities for themselves. They unlearn previous habits of spending, consumption, and bodily practices while eagerly adopting new cultures that are imagined to correspond with their class position in a world-class city and making themselves globally familiar. Thus, the Cosmopolitan Diva is imagined as elite with expensive tastes, travels abroad, and can navigate a globalized economy at home and be at home when abroad. The Cosmopolitan 1 and 2 handbooks aspire towards teaching the skill of navigation and embodying the globally familiar as a process of status creation and as markers of distinction. Now I'll present my second vignette, and I'll discuss this. So, of course, we know that education and institutions serve as techniques of disciplining the body that also enable conspicuous consumption. However, the interesting phenomena to document was the unabashed and the unequivocal fascination that many of the women displayed for grooming and etiquette. The eagerness and enthusiasm to learn about different aspects of grooming the body and etiquette went beyond the frameworks of dressage and docility. I could sense there was always like curiosity, longing, and a certain reverence when I attended a high tea workshop at a high tea drinking workshop at the Oberoi, which is a five-star hotel. Now, in this particular workshop, there were 12 women who were attending the workshop, and 2 of them had also brought their daughters-in-law to this afternoon soiree. They were all from West Delhi and were old friends and relatives. They all came from rich business families and displayed several pieces of precious jewelry, carrying bags from Louis Vuitton and Michael Kors, and they spoke a mix of grammatically incorrect but fluent English and Hindi. All of them were from business families and were primarily housewives in their middle age. And a couple of them also owned boutiques in West Delhi, but which they confessed as to hardly ever visiting, but it was just there as something that they might go if they felt bored. Now, we learned about the different kinds of tea and the various blends and equipments needed as to how to brew tea and how brewing was the correct way of drinking tea as opposed to the Indian way of stewing and steeping the leaves. We were instructed on the do's and don'ts of tea etiquette. For instance, it was very important to stir one's tea noiselessly and to never slurp the tea. It was a habit, according to our instructor, that the Indians were prone to do, and we needed to not do it in order to be ladylike. So we were shown how to stir our tea noiselessly by moving the tea in a small arch back and forth without clinking the spoon on the sides of the cup. At the afternoon tea workshop, what impressed the participants most were the three-tiered stands and the paper doilies that were used for the food. There was a considerable excitement on seeing the elaborate accompaniments, and the women looked pleased with the ceramic stands and the bone china sets. Now, the tea drinking workshops served two purposes. First, it was an exercise in unlearning and capturing the unfamiliar. The workshop, by teaching the participants the correct way to brew, serve, and drink tea, served as a lesson in unlearning previous habits of consuming tea. Tea was introduced in the workshop as an event which had historical precedence, Victorian in this case. Moreover, it was referred to as a practice of elegance, as you can see from the WhatsApp invite that I have shared over here, and as something that could be learned and consequently performed as a lifestyle event. The workshop at one level, with its emphasis on how to brew, say, black tea, how to use a tea infuser, and the purpose of having a tea cooler might appear self-evident to some. But there were also genuine queries as to how exactly to use all of these contraptions and for how long tea leaves should be steeped. Now, this might appear, for me, it was very, in the first glance, it was very surprising that we were all Indian women sitting and learning how to drink tea, which was quite surprising because we are literally a culture that is steeped and stewed in tea in many ways. So to begin with, the tea in its various forms, be it like the black tea or the red tea or the milk tea or say masala chai or noon chai, which is tea with salt, or the Himalayan butter chai, have always been part of the Indian subcontinent since the colonial period. In the hierarchy of tea making, brewing black tea, which was the tea in discussion at this particular workshop, is probably the most basic. And there are other kinds of tea that possibly demand a more skilled hand. However, the workshop was not about the most familiar. The workshop was about capturing the unfamiliar and the aura of the Victorian tea culture with its fancy accompaniments. Thus, it required some amount of unlearning about one's own practices of consuming tea. Furthermore, many of the participants were also trying most of these accompaniments for the first time. The workshop sought to introduce new tastes and the accompanying etiquette of what to wear and how to consume the food items that accompanied the black tea. Secondly, the afternoon tea workshop marked the concept, experience, and practice of etiquette as something that was desirable and aspirational in itself. I noticed that as the women sat there diligently repeating the very many differences, as they figured how to eat clotted cream or like how to eat scones with clotted cream and so on, there was always a palpable murmur of curiosity and excitement. So what was happening, evidently, as what was unfolding in front of my eyes, was a humble cup of tea, when served with scones and clotted cream, assumed a refinement that was no longer desi or vernacular, but was global and thereby aspirational and definitely more attractive. And one of the things that all the women kept repeating as they tried these new things was that this sort of a workshop was so much more better than sitting at home or watching TV. These workshops, according to the women, were classified as things that brought them awareness. It was also a way by which they updated and upgraded themselves. And one of the things that was also very noticeable was that through the trial class and the tea workshop, there was a certain reverence and longing that was displayed over the question of etiquette. Like etiquette in the classes and conversations was established very strangely as an English term. That is, most of the times in spoken English and PD classes, the trainers sought to translate concepts and words in Hindi, but etiquette was always used as an English word. Now, technically, etiquette is also not a foreign concept. There exists a tradition of etiquette in the formation of the genteel Hindu and Muslim middle class, say in the form of the adab or the tehzeeb. However, at TES, Etiquette through lessons in dining, greeting, and speech was projected as a sign of upgradation and one of the components to become, globally familiar. So what do we make of spaces like TES? So according to Ujwala, one of the participants who also helped set up this particular institute, she viewed spaces like TES as a foregrounding of etiquette and grooming, where new forms of pleasure, as it was a new form of pleasure for several of its participants. To quote Ujwala, these ladies who were at the tea party are now seeing a different world. They are living for themselves, going to five-star restaurants, sitting in a cafe, going to places with the fanciest table settings and tasting all that food was a whole new experience. Such workshops are a window to a different world. They are at a stage when their children are grown up and their husbands are at work. So now they have the time and they want to work on themselves and enjoy. There are also other women who want their children to learn and be updated on all these things. Children learn from their mothers. So that is why they are there. Then you also might remember that there were two of them who came with their bahus. It becomes a matter of family pride to have a finished mother and a daughter-in-law. And then at the end of the day, they're all friends and family, and it is a tight-knit group. With so much money, now everyone is also traveling abroad, and now they want to bring that standard to India. And of course, they all want to show off. Now, several things emerge from what Ujwala had just said. She points us to a class that is wealthy and is now actively performing that wealth in the new spaces of consumption in a world-class city. The notion of a finished mother or a daughter-in-law that Ujwala mentions points to the acquiring of what the instructor Asha referred to as awareness, which cannot be gained by mere economic wealth. The economic wealth must be translated into a series of practices and experiences. This is where TES steps in by advising and training its clientele on how to invest in a lifestyle as enshrined in the Cosmopolitan books. Family and familial ties play a prominent role in the lives of women. These include marriages, festivals, informal parties, gatherings, including the kitty parties that become a site for socialization, aspiration, and what earlier Ujwala said, showing off. TES also had a kitty party related etiquette classes, which provided clients with kitty ideas and themes. Kitty parties enabled not just female friendships and solidarity, but it was also a fertile ground for competition and one-upmanship of privileges. Ujwala's description also brings to the forefront how grooming and etiquette feature within the familial networks. To begin with, the women who join TES are mainly the wives and daughters of upper caste Hindus who are traditionally from business families. The families are characterized by intergenerational wealth and direct their efforts to maintain and reproduce their social position and status. Ujitra Ponnaya, in her research on the women of upper caste elite business families of Delhi, shows that there are various strategies deployed by women to consolidate caste networks. This is done by, say, philanthropic activities, sustained socializations and interactions that lead to new business opportunities for the families, and the very careful steering of marriage alliances. In such a context of heightened socialization, TES becomes the space that teaches them to enhance and maintain their status via the creation of new lifestyles. Grooming schools like TES often serve as sites for the rich upper-class Hindu families to send their daughters/daughters-in-law to be updated and productive. That is, learn new things. However, this learning new things is only limited to, going to these kind of classes, because it is not translated into actually, say, education, which has a more transgressive potential where, there's a transgression in terms of caste and patriarchal structures. But this kind of a finishing school and this kind of an updating themselves and being aware and being what they say knowledgeable is also in a way ticking the very visual boxes of being modern and liberal. That is, in-laws allowing girls to spend time on their own outside of their immediate family, wearing what one of my interlocutors called Western outfits. The families claim that they aren't as orthodox as their previous generation. At the same time, by sending the daughters and daughters-in-law to TES, upper caste business families are also able to preserve and improve upon the image of the ideal wife/daughter-in-law via the finishing school pedagogy. Thus, women are encouraged to lead consumptive lifestyles characterized by trips, shopping with friends and family, and wearing expensive jewelry at family gatherings and social circles. The women had to dress as per husbands' friend circles and were expected to reflect the affluence of their families. This takes us back to the earlier point where I was talking about how where I was saying that one of the motivations to join a finishing school is to sort of keep up with the husband's family. And often, like the instructor was also telling me, that husbands would bring their would-be wives to TES so that the women would be adequately groomed to an elite lifestyle. Now, this is not a story of women struggling and fighting to join grooming schools so that they can become market ready and employable. This is also not a story of women trying to fit into their social surroundings, since all my interlocutors at TES were firmly entrenched in their communities. This is a story of how elite women aspire to forge their identities within their family circles via the practices of etiquette and consumption. In this process, they also reproduce their caste and class status by those very same practices. It is also important to remember that investing in a lifestyle is also accompanied by the changing identity of Delhi as it becomes more globalized and consumerist in its image. That is, new lifestyles are made possible because new avenues of travel, spending, and leisure are there, and then they in turn become status markers for the women of these business families. Before I conclude, I want to briefly dwell on the impossible project of being a lady as enshrined through these handbooks. Now, femininity from the TES handbooks and from Asha's classes was never really actually properly defined. It always was a curated balance of not being too dainty, but also not being too opinionated. Right, like you had to walk with a bounce on your hips, but also for people to notice, but you also should not sway too much so that you might attract some kind of an untoward attention. Such ambivalent pronouncements mean that there is always a scope for lack, a market for improvement, and that is also the way the grooming schools function. That there was a constant cycle of what is lacking and what can be improved, and thus everybody became a lifelong learner. So no student will ever be turned away for already being a lady. In fact, one got a lifelong membership at TES if they paid the expensive tuition fee. The classes were held on a rolling basis and one could attend as many sessions as one wanted. The syllabus and the lectures remained the same. Thus, ladylike behavior was institutionally and literally an impossible project that continued in a loop. In conclusion, the fashioning of the Cosmopolitan Diva is closely linked to the changing visualscape of Delhi. The afternoon tea drinking workshop demonstrated the practical nature of consumption and the notion of grooming. The lessons in dining, manners, speech and etiquette, and TES's promotion of etiquette as a foreign category on its website makes etiquette an aspirational category. It might seem that TES's training in deportment and inculcating lifestyle choices that are imagined to be globally familiar are examples of cultural capital in its embodied and cultural state. However, I don't look at TES as teaching cultural capital in a way Bourdieu defines cultural capital. TES, in their efforts to introduce new avenues of consumption and lifestyle choices, operate via a short duration of courses. These are short-term and quick gateways to the visual representation of the global. They are at best TES's quick solutions and routes to accessing the global lifestyles while reproducing and solidifying caste and class status through the forever incomplete project of being ladylike. And I'll stop here and I look forward to the discussion. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Suchismita. That was a very interesting presentation. And I have a couple of points, so I'll kick off the discussion so that I don't, I take my opportunity. So one of the things that came to me when I was, listening to you was how much there is a certain marketization and commodification of the production of femininity that girls in general in their different caste and class locations are subject to. So, that came across, and the finishing school idea is historically so long. I mean, historically we know about it. And it seems that, the West has kind of become a brand manager of this kind of approach to the, to female socialization. But what struck me one was that how much I found myself really alienated from this discourse because sitting, things we take for granted, and there's actually a process about it, which is then marked by certain gendered kind of standards about it, that this is the way to sit, this is the way to drink coffee, this is, I mean, like more, I mean, and why that sounded to me interesting was that in some ways the school that you talked about actually defies the ageism, that this is not a phenomenon, that is for the younger women or for the unmarried women or, women in their reproductive lives, but across the life cycle. So then I thought, I basically am totally not required. I mean, like what I know and about what these women are going to teaching or being taught is totally different. But leave that aside. The other thing was this idea of, the whole focus on subjectivity in terms of body practice, image management, and, a total visualization. So this is this projection, this performance of a subjectivity of the self. But beyond the subject, you have talked about aesthetic labor and, emotional labor. But in this case, in this world of the latter part, because I'm talking about this latter part where you're talking about these elite women coming to this kind of etiquette school or whatever you want to call it. And there it seems to be largely social reproduction. To maintain your social position, to maintain the class structures, to maintain the status quo, if not move a bit higher, but in terms of a certain ideal of a global, and you said globally familiar, but global is also multi-heterogeneous. This is the global elite or global branded elite within a certain historical context, because I don't know, in today's context, isn't it more barista and cafe coffee day and eating, other kinds of things rather than clotted cream and scones? I mean, I don't know. I'm just thinking, like, are we caught in a certain historical warp here also? And maybe is that linked to the colonial context, or I don't know what. And the other thing, so that is the second part I talked about, the social reproduction. But the other part of your presentation was the first part, which was, to me, social mobility, where, the contrast between these girls who are coming for personality development and language improvement in English, their lives, their experiences, their everyday lives in the domestic sphere, and the mall, the ambience of the mall, or the ambience of the multiplex. So, again, to me, it's like, what is going on? Are we living in this surface existence where we just have to perform? But what about what's going on in our heads in this process of learning to perform this? Whether it's because in the second case, there is a certain alignment between what they're thinking and what they're wanting and their resources and, what they're doing. But here there's a disjunct. So I'm worried, about, not worried, but I'm interested in how is this, thing. The third thing is that a lot of this grooming and all comes from psychology, popular psychology, body language, So, I mean, like these people who are running these places, what is the kind of material they're reading? Or is it, because a lot of it is, we read so much about this gesture means this expression means that. You can learn it, you can create an image, you can create an impression, the whole, what Goffman talked about, the whole business of impression management, he talked about it ages ago. And the last point I want to make is, you've talked about the women and these grooming and finishing schools, and there is a certain, feminization of these processes. But in the so-called capitalist global economy that India is embracing, aren't men also required to undergo such kind of things? And what is your thoughts on that? I mean, do we have finishing schools for men? I don't know. I'm just asking. Thanks so much.
Thank you. So shall I quickly respond before?
Let's take a few more and then maybe you can respond together. Can people just speak, or I don't know if they raise their hand and I see it? Or anybody can just speak. I mean, I'm sure it has triggered a lot of thinking in our female listeners, because I could see a lot of triggering going on. So I would really urge people to come forward with that.
I didn't mean to trigger, but I meant to elicit response.
Well, you have also triggered, and it's not a bad thing to trigger also. It may elicit good responses. Yeah, Roma. Can't hear you. Anybody? Can't believe that nobody has anything to say or ask. Can't hear you.
कोई चीजें पर्सनल किसी के हाथ लगे वो कई बार कैसे पाओ वो पीछे अंगुल कर दी होगी ना वो फोन ले
So why don't you, Suchismita, respond to my things, and maybe then we'll have some response, comments or queries later.
Yeah.
Why don't you respond to what I...
Yeah, firstly, thank you, Professor Adlakha, for these 3 points. They're actually very, very fertile in terms of trying to explain more about the grooming schools. So I'll start with the question of the training of the instructors and pop psychology. So yes, so there is a difference in terms of the different grooming schools that exist. So spoken English teachers often have some form of training that is there in, say, communication skills, or more importantly, they have been previously employed in call centers, and thereby they kind of have a training in voice and accent. Now, what is impossible, because it's such an informal business, that there doesn't really exist, in that sense, a qualification that all of them need to pass, because most of them are like, this industry is so based, is so personality driven, that if you look like someone and if you can teach soft skills, that's more than enough. So there is always an interview process, although there are many places where, for instance, in personality development classes, especially where the trainers have read on pop psychology, so they do use lessons from psychology, especially when it comes to, say, time management and stress management. Say one of their favorite things to talk about in time management is Stephen Covey's, the how to be more effective. Like, there are a bunch of books, and at the same time there are also psychological lessons that have come in the form of emotion management. Emotional intelligence is something that is taught very seriously in personality development classes as a way to make students more diplomatic, and diplomatic is one of their ways, so that you are not too emotional. So one of the things that you constantly see is this constant reining and controlling of emotions that goes on in these PD classes. So how do you become more diplomatic and more people pleasing and all of that? So affective labor, how do you manage your affect in an effective manner? So that's one. And yes, there are actually, in fact, this particular finishing school is exclusively for women, and which is why I wanted to see what was so exclusively being taught to women that I decided to focus on this. But in my other schools, like it's say in spoken English classes or personality development classes, which also had a little bit of the component of deportment and body language, mainly the boys/men outnumbered the girls in these classes. So it was also in a way to see how a lot of men were also very interested in personality development. And it is also a reflection of how the current, the job market in terms of the service industry is demanding certain forms of disposition and certain orientations from the men as well. So this idea of being polite and the idea of, being docile, which is something that is produced by the grooming school as something that is important for one to be employable and market ready. And this also explains, like, there are also students who come before job placements to learn interview skills, training, and so on. So there are so men are very much a part of these grooming schools, although there still exists certain very gendered divisions in that sense. Like, for instance, in a personality development school, I remember we had this entire session on grooming, and where we were actually taught how to, men and women were taught how to dress, the importance of hygiene and so on. But then the discussion of appearance when it came to men was just limited to them taking a bath, having a clean shower, having a clean shave, and so on. Whereas there was a separate session taken for women when it came to makeup classes. So there exist these kind of divisions, but at the same time, I would say that the idea of what makes somebody employable in this neoliberal market, which values, say, certain forms of enterprise, quote unquote enterprise, which values a certain form of docility, those are actually manufactured as employable qualities. So then this also explains why more and more men are joining these kind of schools in order to learn how to be employable, to learn to be market ready. And they often, as I said before, outnumber the women. Okay, so when we're talking about social mobility and when we're talking about these finishing schools, there is a certain way in which one is also trying to establish eliteness. And while the eliteness to some extent is, what you said about baristas and cafe coffee days versus something as archaic as, say, scones and clotted cream, there is very much a colonial hangover that is there in these etiquette classes. There is a fascination towards what is considered global, but that global is also very much Western Europe. Like, we are not talking about aspiring for something in Scandinavia, like not Scandinavia as much as, say, some other country, but it's very much like these mainstream nations, like it's either the US or the aspirations are towards Australia and Canada. So it's accordingly like they also design their classes. Like in one of the schools, I remember, we were specifically asked to use the word realtor because most of them were going to Canada. So already get that kind of a vocabulary going. So they also tailor their classes in that sense. But at the same time, there is a way in which when it comes to, say, lower middle class women attending personality development classes, there is a disjuncture that is there. For instance, when they are learning about a lot of these things, especially when they are learning about emotion management, often they would tell me that this doesn't work with parents. Like, there is no way, like, I cannot I cannot ask my parents to talk to me calmly. I cannot ask them to be rational. There is a way in which these will not apply in one's private lives. But the instructors are very determined to make what they say, that we want to make a balanced rebel out of girls. So there is a way in which you need to navigate and talk to parents, which is also help you in hospitality industry. But at the same time, there is a disjuncture which happens where what is being taught, what is being what is being stated, especially in asking young women to be more enterprising, does not necessarily translate into jobs. So the fact that you have learned your English, you know soft skills, it necessarily has not amounted to some of my interlocutors actually finding jobs. And this then leads to what I have been witnessing, a cycle of what is this thing called as being lifelong learners, where they join from one course to the other, hoping at some point there is a way in which you will get a job. So it is a way in which the grooming schools and the current industry is also making the labor precarious, where you have to constantly, what they call, upskill yourself. And this obviously produces a sort of despondence and anxiety, is what I have seen in a lot of my young interlocutors. But when it comes to this particular finishing school, where we are talking about older women, there is none of that. It is very clearly where you are using these spaces as forms of pleasure, where you have come to spend time to socialize, and at the same time you're consolidating your identity. So yeah, I think I've answered most of it. And yes, and it is very much about the social reproduction. Like, it is very clearly, this particular space that I'm talking is very much about that.
Any more? Any more questions, queries, comments, observations?
Oh, and the other thing I forgot to add was this, that like the fact that there are grooming schools, it also exists because there's such an inequality in terms of capital, and there is so much of precarity in the neoliberal market. Like otherwise, why are there grooming schools? Like it is precisely because people do not know, for instance, what constitutes, speaking in the right manner, and which might appear very self-evident to people who have been to a certain class and certain institutions. So grooming schools are there to form what is called this bridge work, or this particular form of, attunement practices.
Any more? We have a lot of participants, but they all are silent.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Yeah.
Ma'am, I want to ask that these grooming schools, are these important for girls who want to go in fashion and modeling?
Did you get that, Suchismita? Hello?
Sorry, I'm saying that, yes, I got the question. It's this that I like, because she's also posted this as a chat. So I'll just read it out in case people did not get the question. Good afternoon, ma'am. I want to ask that, are these grooming schools important for girls who want to go in modeling and fashion field? Well, honestly, if anybody wants to sort of go into the fashion world or modeling, yes, there are people who do go for these classes. But I mean, while I have had two of my respondents who were trying to go into modeling, because one of the things that they told me was there's something called a personality round, which means that you need to sort of have soft skills when it comes to quickly, answering and thinking on your feet and so on. But mainly the women who have joined these schools also were people who wanted to get into the service industry, the hospitality industry, or something as some basic as that they wanted to be more assertive in their families. So how to now, sort of argue without coming across quote unquote hysterical. So a lot of that, so the motivations were very different for different women. But yes, people who wanted to be models have also come to these grooming schools because precisely to learn soft skills.
There's this Mala Kullar has written, clearly there's an element of upward mobility that the women who join these courses. So although you say they have elite class and caste background, more needs to be understood about their background and why they aspire to seek such training.
Yes, definitely. Thanks, Mala, for this question, for this comment. So this particular presentation that I made, which is only like talking about West Delhi, and so it was a group of like 10, 12 women, and I also met some of the extended group, and it was mainly via kinship, connections, and this was an exception. Not an exception in that sense, but definitely this was particularly a finishing school, which was also very elite, simply because you had to pay 70 to 80,000 for a course. Now that automatically weeded out a lot of people, and which is why based on their caste backgrounds and the fee and the lifestyle, because I've been to their, I interacted with them very closely, is why I call them elite. Now, in other places like personality development classes, soft skill training centers, or say spoken English classes, yes, there are women who are not elite, who will not come under this particular category, and whose ambitions are really not to go to the Oberoi or to kind of take part in certain very fancy places. It was very limited to. They were very concerned with to speak English so that they could get a job, to speak English so that they could at least get front desk jobs. So there was a very clear articulation of their wants. And one of it was the service industry, which has taken over so prominently now. And at the same time, there were also young women who also wanted to be more popular in college. So trying to be part of the debating societies. So practicing in spoken English classes via role plays and debates was also one of their ways. So the motivations were multiple when it came to younger women, and they were also multiple when we look at, say, the other kinds of institutes that exist in the form of spoken English or personality development classes. Thank you.
So I want to actually come back if I can, because otherwise I'll forget. I talked about this whole thing of presentation of the self and the image. A lot of this focus here, whether it's, with women, there is a lot of focus anyhow on image, in terms of body proportions or makeup or dress. But I don't know if it's across the world, but in India, I noticed that there's this particular equation that people seem to establish between Western outfits and modernity.
Yeah.
And you actually see many women, and you see this across class also, and in industries and in normal workplaces among one's friends also, where they're into Western clothes, but you can clearly feel they're not comfortable or they don't have the body language of the Western outfit. They have a they'll be hunched up, or they'll be, so the sense of appearance and all, so you're presenting like two different sets of people, these elite women who are doing it for other reasons also. But what is the role of appearance? Because in both cases, body practice and appearance, particularly, is it that we can live at this? Is it the construction of a very surface self that is that can negotiate in the social context, and whatever is beyond that self is not important? Can you just comment on that?
So the grooming schools are very clear. And I feel that there is a lot of merit in understanding what they seem to think as a very superficial thing. Like one of the things that they constantly keep saying is, "Jo dikhta hai, wahi bikta hai." So we are not talking about an authentic self as much of a self who is presented in a certain manner. So one of the things that I noticed, and especially with respect to clothing, was this, that one of my interlocutors who was part of this particular class, so I ended up hanging out with her quite often, and we would go together, and she would always take me to boutiques to buy new clothes because there's always a party happening. And one of the things that she would constantly tell me as a matter of justifying and legitimizing the finishing school and her in-laws was this, that how liberal her in-laws were, because they're allowing her to go to this finishing school, A. B, the other thing that marked their so-called modern outlook was the fact that they were very insistent that she does not wear Indian clothes, but she always wears Western clothes and she goes out and socializes. Now, these things become important because for her, she said that when I was in Kanpur, I was always guarded. So the city as such also presented, like Delhi, it also presented her a chance where she could also like enjoy. And this is also part of this kind of a milieu where I often would hear people describe that it's the clothing in a way also symbolizes a lot of their broad-mindedness. So constantly are stating that their in-laws are broad-minded because they wear clothes, they are allowed to wear certain clothes. Now, what was also interesting to note that while the in-laws are allowing the women to sort of spend time on their own, hang out with strangers like me, and wear Western clothes, because one of the things that I would often be asked was, because I would be doing my field work, sometimes wearing salwar kameez, they'll be like, "Oh, why are you not wearing jeans?" A. B, the other thing that was extremely noticeable was this, that every time one of these interlocutors who would be hanging out with me, her mother-in-law would call every half an hour to find out where she is. So there is also a way in which tabs are being kept, and in the name of concern, but it is also being expressed as something where they are modern. So this modernity versus Western clothes is also something which is very much hinging on appearances. But I also feel that it's important to understand the politics of these appearances, because it is making such a big difference in their lives, where they say that they feel confident to go to a certain space, if they speak a little bit of English, if they are dressed in a certain form. And the image consultants also have something called appearance management. And the whole emphasis is somewhere to make people look effortless, which comes from a lot of effort, which comes with a lot of bodily disciplining, which comes from a lot of curated lessons. And these lessons, as I said, are very short term. So they are not interested in a long-term transformation of selves. They are not interested in, say, the idea of a transformation of self, which would often happen with, say, education, which does not happen. So none of them had even completed college. They were married, and then their in-laws were like, why will you study further? Why don't you do a course? So they were always actively asked to pursue hobbies. And this finishing school then becomes a place where they are also getting, quote unquote, educated.
Yeah, can we just if there are no more queries or questions or comments, can we take a photograph? Can everyone please turn on their cameras, because we need to take a photograph for our records. Akhlaq, Sunderesh, please, Akhlaq, apna kholo camera. Still some cameras required. Priyanka Singhal, Roma Sharma, Shakshi Rana, could you please turn on your cameras? Indrani, Anchal. Jasmine, Asta. A lot of people, but their cameras are not coming on. Akhlaq?
Yes, ma'am.
आप लेंगे ना? या सुंदरेश ले रहे हैं? कितने लोग का नहीं है अभी? सबका हो गया? नहीं
आया, हो गया मैडम।
हो गया? ले लिया?
जितना आया, जिसने ओपन किया सबका आ गया। ठीक है,
ठीक है। So if there are no more questions or comments, can we?
I have a question, ma'am. Can I ask?
Ashwati, sure.
My question is regarding image consultation. Like, image consultant also help the person to reshuffle their wardrobe and buy new kind of cosmetics to change their image. I mean, reshuffle their wardrobe, is it true? And secondly, these kind of programs like reshuffling wardrobe, change your getup, this kind of program are pretty common in America and also in UK. So these are, I mean, there are certain programs where there is an image consultant who get into their house and they reshuffle their wardrobe, they change their image. So what is your take on this?
I mean, yes, there is, I feel like this matrix of appearance and aspirations that is fueled by inequalities in capital, and, you know, there's also a precarity in an increasingly neoliberal market is also what drives people to groom themselves. So in that manner, we also have to see that grooming is also like a business. And here, image consultants, they try and distinguish themselves from the other kinds of grooming instructors that are there in the market, say like a personality development or a spoken English teacher, which is how they also try and justify their steep prices, like say 7,000 for 1 or 2 hours of consulting and so on. And they also promise that it will be a customized experience. Like all of these classes are held in groups and so on. And image consultants try and distinguish themselves because they also want to kind of formulate a very niche market for themselves. And which is also why that image consultants, when it comes to what they say, we deal with the ABCDE of your life. What is that? Appearance, body language, etiquette, digital etiquette. Appearance, body language, communication skills, digital presence, and etiquette. So yeah, so A, B, C, D, E. And in that, in appearance management, so if you pay, like, there are these, so they kind of assess you. There is a way in which they assess you. So you have to go through like one, not an aptitude test, but something what they call an image quotient test. And then they ask you and they give you all these options, and then you can choose accordingly what you need, what you don't need. And I couldn't afford a wardrobe reshuffling. So, but then that is very much there, like where the image consultant will come and they will sort of examine your wardrobe and they'll see what are the kind of clothes you need. And they also have a style sheet. So it's a way in which they're very highly, like, it's a way to, I feel, honestly, to marketize this idea of appearance, because a lot of it can come on your own. But then women are also the most insecure when it comes to body image, which is something that they capitalize on. And this kind of a catalog system, not so, I mean, India tops when it comes to providing the services where they come home. So what you're describing in UK and US happens, but not in the kind of way in which it happens in India, not definitely at the rate and the popularity and in terms of the number of image consultants who will come at your service if you want to do something like this. A. B, the catalog system has existed in UK, like there's Daniel Miller's work, which does talk about this cataloging system and what it does to like making, in terms of how women have this complicated relationship with their bodies, and whether the catalog system actually eases it or does it make more complicated. So there, yes.
When I read the title of your presentation, I was quite intrigued, because my understanding of what a diva is a very stereotypical one, where it was like someone, who's a bit of a drama queen, very entitled, quite confident, but extremely egoistic, and, full of herself, and like quite a pain. So now you're producing a new form of the diva, which was something I guess I learned this time.
I mean, I am not actually, I definitely wouldn't even want to produce this kind of a diva, but it is the finishing school. And honestly, women are like, everyone's better off if they are a little arrogant. I mean, precisely what happens in these grooming schools is to tell women and also to tell men that you don't know enough and we are here to teach you. And this is why I think that this idea of this cultural capital is a wrong way to look at it, because these are only short kind of, short courses, quick gateways to sort of make you look visually global in a
but they're focusing on the surface now, so it's not difficult also to learn the techniques. It's not bringing about, it's not even demanding, or its aim is not to bring about any major change in yourself. You just like, you dress up, you're like a doll. You can dress up in different ways and carry those images.
Yeah, then you also see that this dressing up is not matching, because there are these ungroomed figures that one always holds as these foils. And then there are, the idea to look effortless and I definitely feel it comes from the idea of, it depends a lot on the kind of capital that you possess. So to learn this is also a struggle for so many people, where they feel completely out of place. So while it is sort of marketed as a teachable category, it is also not that kind of it is also a difficult and a long process. And which is why it explains that, see, if everybody was becoming successful, the grooming schools would be out of business in no time. Like, you learn it and you have, that's about it, you perform it. And the difficulty is precisely in learning and performing, and which then explains the number of courses then you keep taking. Like, so spoken English, after that you take a personality development, after that maybe you do a special deportment class and so on. So yes, Professor
Mala?
I was interested to know that, you mentioned that these women are not really aspiring to work, but then wouldn't some life histories be useful to see what their families managed to gain through by putting them through such courses, in terms of status or in terms of kind of image building or something like that. And the other thing I was interested to know was the age cohort. Maybe I missed it, but have any of them given up work? Do they have children? Are they from urban backgrounds or new urban backgrounds, or, first or second generation rural? So it would be just interesting to review some of those things, because, some of these things are kind of it's like years ago when you talked about how to make tea, for instance, it was reminiscent of years ago when I did fieldwork in rural Delhi. And there was a Greh Vigyan textbook in which you were taught the correct way of making tea, which was not at all the Indian way of making tea, but you put a tea cozy and you have cups and saucers and that kind of thing. So at different levels, you had these kinds of teaching, one would say, whether it's little kids in primary school or whether it's grown-up women who have come from a different background, but they want to become part of a new world. So I appreciate that, but I just wondered, if there was any family input or any kind of information or life histories, in a sense, that you might have undertaken, and also work. Are these women never going to aspire to work, or if they do, it'll just be in the family business, so to speak, or something like that? But anyway, very interesting. So I just thought I'd put this to you.
Thank you, Mara, for this question. So yes, so the most of these women who are in this particular today's talk, that they were essentially women between 27 to 37 for one session, which was in the beginning. I was talking about deportment, and then when I did the tea workshop, when I was attending, all of them were like in their 40s and 50s, like very much in their 50s, and they were people who had husbands and children, but now they were away. And they clearly looked at this as a time that they wanted to invest in themselves. So people also came with their daughters-in-law. Now, none of them have worked, like they have finished college. Some of them were college dropouts. So it was also something like they did, like work was not encouraged in the family.
So it was a kind of time pass between, getting married and having children or something of that sort.
And at the same time, work was also not a form of self-expression, and which is why it was some of them said that they do own boutiques in West Delhi, but they never went there. Like it was managed by somebody else. It was in their name, but they barely even went. Now, the only one person in this entire thing who also helped build the institute, she was the only person who had an event management company. So she was very clear that because she's there to learn these things, so that it helps in client relations and client management. So there was a very clear reason as to why she was attending this class. And she had two very young children, and it was a very career oriented move. But she was someone who I didn't like. She was the one who sort of gave me a bird's eye view of what was happening with the other women, and sort of explained who is related to who and how, and different background histories and how they all came together. And those entire idea of kitty parties, which I had no idea about, how kitties are such an important space of not just socialization, but also a very fertile ground to show privilege and to demonstrate privilege. And that's how I sort of encountered them.
And don't underestimate it. It's also to do business.
Yes, absolutely. And all of these places become very important, because it's all the wives who come together, and then marriage alliances are steered, different kind of, alliances are also brought into the fold. So it's also that way. That's why I called it a very fertile ground to kind of see this sort of, social reproduction taking place. Now, I actually have something interesting to say about the Greh Vigyan courses that you are talking about. So while I was doing my research, the first thing that struck me was how similar is this, or is this very similar to home science and, the kind of Greh Vigyan textbooks that one is talking about. So I did do a little bit of research at the Lady Irwin College, and to try and see if there is a similarity in, say how home science was imagined, because I mean, right now it's home economics, and it's taken a very different trajectory, but when it was still home science, and in the 1940s and 1950s. Now, I found a very fundamental difference in terms of the home science was very much geared towards producing citizens. You wanted to be an efficient, thrifty homemaker, because it was also, the woman was considered in a way the home was a space of nation building as well. So you had to kind of produce produce a very, you had to produce a resilient nation. And so it began with the home, and home science in a way was the management of home. And we are also talking about citizen and the idea of a good citizen. Now, I tried asking a lot of people, I mean, especially instructors, if they were trained in home science, if they saw something that was similar happening. I mean, and then I also looked at the syllabus and I realized that this, what we are seeing now, while there are similarities in how to brew tea or maybe, you know, how to even keep the home nice, how to keep the home aesthetic, but it's very much from the point of view of lifestyle consumption. It is not so much catered towards the home, because all of these women, especially in this finishing school, had also a bevy of, you know, household help. So it was not so much about, you know, me learning how to do it and why I should learn it to become more thrifty and efficient, but and as to so as to not spend a lot of money. But this was just the opposite of where I need to spend money in order to cultivate and demonstrate a certain lifestyle. And I need to have the the technical know-how is the wrong word, but for the lack of a better word, to have the so-called knowledge to do it. So that's how, and which is why also like home science is something that I'm still interested in, but I have not brought in at all because I thought those are two very different things that we are talking about, at least in their outlook, like in their politics, in that sense.
Okay. Thank you, Mala. Thank you, Suchismita. I think you made a presentation which all of us in some way can relate to, especially Delhiites and seen the city and, you know, who've grown up in the city and what life was like. Things have not changed very much. They've just taken on a different format. Things, you know, it's like the economy also drives many issues, and the elites have always played these kind of games, so to speak, you know, to keep their position, and it's been part of the system. So thank you very much, and we really enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you. I also had a great time.
And thank you, all of you, for the participants or the audience. It was nice having you all. I think quite a few of them are your students or something, because I see names who are not generally there, and they're there, so I'm attributing it to your.
I think no, my students have exams going on. I don't think they'll be coming for
anyhow this. You've brought in you have a fan club going, so congratulations. Thank you. Goodbye. Please remain in touch.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much.